everyone, and welcome to my first full moon forecast for 2022, which is all about the full moon in Cancer, which happens on the 17th of January, of course, depending on where you are in terms of time zones. So this is an interesting one. In many respects, we are still looking very much kind of towards the past, because we've still got Venus retrograde and Mercury is also newly retrograde. So there's still a firm focus on, kind of past events, past relationships, past ways of viewing things, etc., etc. But at the same time, we're on the cusp of change, and that astrologically is represented quite strongly by the fact that Uranus is going to station direct within a couple of days. In fact, I think it's one day after this new moon, and we also are entering Aquarius season on around about the 19th or the 20th of January, again depending on your time zone. So it's a really, really interesting time when we are kind of bridging two worlds almost, where we're kind of bridging past and future in a way. And we can see this reflected in both the Sabian symbol and the fact that the sun and the moon are on opposite sides of the earth, and therefore in the polar opposite signs of Cancer and Capricorn. So we can see this as being a time of kind of closing off or culminating or concluding things that we began at the new moon in Capricorn earlier in January, but equally it can be about a balancing out of the two life areas or aspects of life that are represented by Cancer and Capricorn. And of course these are the archetypal father and mother figures in the zodiac. So we're talking about a lot of energy that is associated with the family or the tribe, but also our relationships to how we parent ourselves, both in terms of kind of whipping ourselves into shape and maintaining a certain degree of self-discipline and mastery, with goat season, with Capricorn, and then on the other hand, how we practice self-care and are not too hard on ourselves. So in other words, we find ways to nurture and feed ourselves emotionally with that beautiful moon in Cancer. So we're going to look at these themes in more detail. We're going to dive in. I'm also going to have a look at the cosmic calendar, this particular forecast, to see what's ahead for the next 2 weeks in terms of transits. It's been a little bit quiet kind of astrologically. So yes, it'll be interesting to see what's kind of coming up, because I think the end of January, beginning of February is going to be quite an interesting pivotal time in terms of the astrology. So in terms of themes and kind of overall energies, we are talking about the balancing of cardinal earth and water, both of which are considered to be yin energies in the Chinese system. So in many respects, what we're kind of doing is we're balancing out the energies that were prevalent or that were the main focus at the Capricorn new moon that we had at the beginning of January, which was all about finding structure, going out into the world, putting our New Year's resolutions into action, striving, success, all the things that are associated with goat season. And now we're balancing that with the opposite energy of Cancer, which is all about self-love, self-care, roots, family, home and hearth, that kind of thing. So it's a balancing of that sort of striving in the external world with the need to kind of rest and rejuvenate, and also renew and reaffirm our connections to family and to those people that we're very close to. So, I think it's important at this full moon, particularly given that the luminaries are going to be making an aspect to Pluto, which is quite intense, that we do make some time for self-care and downtime, and that we have that we practice good sort of mental health hygiene, and that we find ways to kind of nourish and nurture ourselves without necessarily flipping into self-indulgence. Although, in that sense, we do need to remember that the crab is an archetype both of the mother, which is obviously very nurturing and caring and giving, but it's also the archetype associated with the child, so the inner child. And of course, it's very important for us to kind of do inner child work and to sort of soothe and protect that inner child with good boundaries and that kind of thing. And then, but on the other hand, we also need to just find ways to kind of bring structure into our life and self-discipline with that Capricorn sun, so that we don't become like too kind of we don't wallow, for example. But I think very much, given that we are moving away from Capricorn season, we're moving into Aquarius season, which happens 2 days after this this full moon, that I think it's important for us to kind of just take time out from what could have been quite a hectic 2-week period from that new moon onwards at the beginning of January, and maybe just take a pause, take a breath, make sure that we refuel, we recharge, that we spend time with loved ones, that we reconnect with who we are at a kind of fundamental heart level, and also find ways to practice self-care and self-soothing, finding healthy coping mechanisms, perhaps during a period that's not necessarily been all that easy, with everything retrograde, and particularly during the second half of January where we have 2 planets retrograde. I think it is going to be important to definitely practice that, and to also realize that it's going to be perhaps a slower pace than the first half of January. Even though it might not feel like it at the time of the full moon itself, because we do have this, as I say, we've got this very intense energy coming in with the Sun making a conjunction to Pluto, and this keys into what we'll see is a mystic rectangle in the overall chart for this full moon, and mystic rectangles are about trying to sort of reconcile opposites, but in a flowing way. So finding ways, very similar to the idea of the element of water, finding ways to kind of flow to kind of roll with the punches, if stuff kind of comes up, but at the same time not necessarily feel that we have to do everything the hard way, or kind of punish ourselves, it can be a trait of Capricorns, that's that they are very hardworking, and that they kind of lead punishing schedules, and they don't feel that they have the right to really rest or recuperate or have any time off. And I think it's about trying to find that balance. We are talking about the Sun and the Moon on opposite sides of the ecliptic, of the sort of the Earth. So one sign in Capricorn and one in Cancer. So we're trying to find balance between these two, what are essentially archetypal masculine and feminine energies. So we're talking about the father and the mother. So we're really talking about the kind of family unit, and about like parenting, inner parenting. So we've obviously got to strike that balance between adulting, which is very Capricorn on the one hand, being quite sort of strict with ourselves, and then the Cancer energy, which is a lot more loving and accepting, and realizes that it's associated with the unconditional love of the mother. So self-love, self-care, all that good stuff. And then the other thing is that we're moving, as I said, away from the sort of striving energy of Capricorn towards Aquarius season. And it's interesting that within a couple of days of this full moon, we do have 2 events that are kind of linked. So the first is that Uranus goes direct on around about the 18th of January. And then we have the Sun ingressing into Aquarius on around about the 19th or the 20th. So within, as I say, a couple of days of this full moon. So there'll be quite a shift of energy, and it could feel a little bit disconcerting, as I say, because the energies are so intense at the full moon, with this opposition between the moon and Pluto, and the conjunction with the Sun, and then we kind of shift into this air energy, which is somewhat detached. So it can feel a little bit jarring, and I think you just need to sort of bear in mind that if you feel a little bit off center, or somehow discombobulated, that it's potentially because of this cosmic turbulence, if you like. And I think you just have to kind of give it time for the energies to sort of settle a little bit. I am going to have a look more sort of individually at the upcoming transits for the next 2 weeks, just to kind of give you a heads up of what's happening when, because it has been a little bit of a strange time. We've had these transits, and then we've had these massive lulls where nothing is kind of happening. And I think that pacing ourselves is going to be important. I think that's part of self-care, because we are still shedding, some of the toxic habits and attachments that were kind of prompted by Venus retrograde. And of course, Venus retrograde continues until the end of January. So that process is kind of ongoing. And then you add to that Mercury retrograde, which started on the 14th or so a couple of days before this full moon. And we're now talking about an additional layer of energy that is asking us to sort of review the way that we think, the way that we communicate, that kind of thing. Obviously, a lot depends on where Mercury is natally in your chart, and also where Mercury is where Aquarius is for you, Aquarius and Capricorn, because those are the two signs where Mercury is going to be during retrograde. So I think it's always important to just bear that in mind. And then on top of that, if when we kind of talk about relationships, we're also potentially talking with that Sun Pluto conjunction about purging issues around control, exploitation, manipulation, skeletons in the closet, lies, secrets, that kind of thing from the ancestral lines, particularly the male, the patriarchal ancestral lines, because the Sun is very much associated with masculine energy. So, there's a lot that's going on, and January is traditionally that month of kind of detoxing and purging. So, I think if we consider this to be a time of kind of letting go and of releasing and that kind of thing, and pacing that process, then I think we're going to kind of get through this energy fine. But it, as I said, can feel a little bit emotional. We can feel this urge to sort of run away and hide, because Cancer in and of itself is the sign where the moon is quite strong, and it can make us feel very touchy and sort of ultra sensitive, and so we can overcompensate, with that. If you think about the crab and the hard shell or the pincers, we can either want to sort of retreat into our shells, or we could sort of feel a little bit defensive. And I think that's just something to bear in mind, particularly, as I say, with that very intense Sun Pluto energy on the one hand, and then the slightly more exciting energy of Uranus going direct, which we will look at further when we look at the cosmic calendar. Now, in terms of the Sabian symbol, we have a kind of a similar theme kind of creeping in. So this full moon occurs towards the end of the sign of Cancer, so the 28th degree of Cancer. And Sabian symbol-wise, this is a modern-day Pocahontas. Now, I mean, I think here the key thing is kind of reconciling past and future. So it's trying to sort of balance the need for change kind of going forward in the future, but reconciling that with some of the wisdom that we've inherited from the past. I mean, I'm kind of drawn to the channel and the film Kiss the Ground, and how they are kind of reintroducing us to some of the ancient farming principles that allow us to to sort of rehabilitate our soil and reintroduce like ancient farming practices, like aeration and kind of say grazing, for example, and crop rotation, that kind of thing, as ways to regenerate soil and to grow more nutritious crops. And so it's not a case of just shutting out the past and saying there's nothing to be gained from it. I think there certainly is wisdom that we can bring into the present and then take forward into the future. But equally, there are things that that will require us to challenge or go against the status quo. And I think it's trying to bridge those two worlds. This is really what this full moon is all about. So it's trying to bridge the modern and the ancient, the past and the future, and to either kind of bring in a new sort of paradigm, particularly as we enter Aquarius season and Uranus sort of goes direct, or sort of re-embrace some of the more kind of natural earth-based attitudes, as I say, that particularly traditional cultures have kind of held. They've held that wisdom through oral traditions and things down the centuries. So it's kind of an interesting one. It can also be a little bit to an extent about feeling other, so not feeling like you belong either here or there. And I think that is part and parcel of where we all find ourselves right now, as we kind of we slowly been shifting out of old paradigms. We're not quite finished with them yet, and we're still in Capricorn season, which is all about tradition. We kind of, and then we're shifting into the sort of the Aquarius energy, but we're not quite there yet either. So it's trying to accept that that right now things are neither this nor that, but kind of both and also that in some circumstances we may want to belong, but we may not belong anymore because we're changing. So it's accepting the kind of the otherness, either in ourselves or in others, and not being judgmental about the fact that everybody is at a kind of a different place in their process, I think. And I think this is also to do with the individual's attitude towards, first of all, the tribe. So, with Cancer and Capricorn, we're talking first about the family, and then of course society, which is a kind of an extrapolation out of that into a slightly wider kind of group situation. So it's very much to do with this relationship between individual and clan or tribe, and trying to find ways to not necessarily upset the group, but also to not feel that you have to necessarily do everything that your group approves of or your family approves of, in that sense, kind of accepting, say, for example, that your family might have been brought up in a particular way, or you might have instilled certain values in you, but maybe through your exposure, say, at being at university or at school or just traveling, or kind of life experience in the workplace, you've met other people and you've encountered different kind of values and perspectives through friends or lovers or that kind of thing, and finding a way to sort of live with both, to make peace with both, and to not necessarily judge oneself or others by a particular set of standards, because neither of them may be 100% perfect. So it's, I think, really just about letting go of judgment in many respects, and just accepting what is in a kind of a fluid way, and that fits very much with the kind of the I Ching idea of the way and of water, that it's very much this way of water. And of course Cancer is a water sign, so I think it's very much about letting things flow, letting things be what they are, not what we necessarily want them to be, or what our group or clan thinks that things should be. Just allowing things to flow, and accepting what is, and also accepting that things can change. Water keeps moving, it moves around things, it keeps going, and being okay with that process, just sort of not necessarily trying to kind of grasp onto things or situations or emotions, and just allowing things to shapeshift, if you like, from one thing into another. As I say, I do think this is quite a transitional time in many respects. Now, in terms of the lunar phase, I think this is quite interesting. So we are talking about the last 5 degrees of Cancer, and this is all about consolidation, according to James Burgess. So, at the end of a tough working day, we do like to sort of kick back and relax, and I think that's why he's talking here about relaxation as being an important aspect of life. So play, relaxation, enjoying time with family, friends, that kind of thing. So it's finding that balance between work and play. And also, I think here he's hinting at the transition from Capricorn into Aquarius energy. So he says humanity has the power to overcome problems and dramatically create ways forward. And I think that this is going to be the shift as Uranus stations and we move into Aquarius season, where we are seeing maybe solutions to problems that have been plaguing us for a while, and almost feeling a little bit more hopeful, kind of on a collective level, that that things can change for the better. Because I think a lot of us felt quite stuck during the retrograde season, and as I say, this will be coming to an end, kind of end of January, beginning of February, as Venus stations and then Mercury kind of follows. So then I think momentum will start to build a little bit, but we will start to feel that with Uranus stationing, as I say, around about the 18th of January or so. So I think this brings us to the next point, which is life is change. We must find a way to adjust, and yes, particularly Uranus can sometimes bring in some shocking, sometimes jarring changes, particularly if we weren't expecting them. Uranus is the planet of the unpredictable, and with it going direct, as I say, we could find that this energy will be expressed more in the outside world. So the focus has been a lot on kind of making internal changes and preparing ourselves for change when Uranus is retrograde, and then when it moves direct, we start to see changes actually happening in the outside world. So I think, as I say, momentum starting to build, and things starting to actually shift externally during this 2-week phase. And then I think, an extension of the lunar phase that we looked at last moon phase with leaders gently guiding the community through evolutionary steps of change. And I think this is kind of the sort of the maternal paternal aspect of Cancer Capricorn, where good leaders are almost like parents that help their community through the evolutionary steps of change, towards kind of new beginnings. And sometimes that involves breaking people in gently, helping them to realize that change is a process, that it doesn't happen all in one go, that it does sometimes require some emotional integration or some processing, some psychological processing. And I think this 2 week period is a good time in which to kind of do that. So that, if we take this theme of consolidation, it's about taking the kind of retrospective Cancerian view, which loves and values the past, and then incorporating it into the need to plan and accept the fact that we need to look to the future and to try and decide how we're going to sort of move forward, but to do this incrementally. I think this is where Capricorn is really good. It's about structuring things like steps almost, so that we move towards change incrementally, so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. So in terms of this cheat sheet, this is really how this full moon stands to affect you personally. So what we're looking at here is the 2 life areas represented by the sun and the moon, where you are trying to kind of bring about some balance or kind of reconcile areas where you feel polarized or at odds or kind of conflicted. So for example, with say for example your rising sign is Cancer, you can see that this life area is all about self-expression, physical appearance, health, vitality, and your kind of persona, so the way that other people perceive you. And on the other hand, the sun is going to be in your 7th house of significant others, so this is spouses, romantic partners, or kind of business partnerships. So it's usually one-to-one relationships, and the needs and obligations that you have in those situations. So it's really trying to balance your own needs on the one hand versus those of others, kind of the give and take between yourself and others. So take a moment to pause the video, have a look, and I'm going to continue with the forecast, but feel free to just stop and take a closer look. So with regards to the astrology, I mean, it's quite interesting actually. We can see, first of all, the moon in Cancer up here in the chart, and we can see that it's making a mystic triangle, first of all to the sun, but then also to the sun and Pluto, but also to the nodes. So it's kind of an interesting one actually, where we're kind of balancing events that may not necessarily be within our control, particularly the nodes and Pluto. They very often tend to represent events that are beyond our control, in the kind of wider kind of arc of like fate or destiny, if you like. And then the sun and the moon are very much about how we respond to those, or how we process those or receive those or react to that. So, with such positive aspects, this does suggest that that even though things might feel very intense with that Sun-Pluto conjunction, that if we are willing to change and we're willing to sort of face up to certain possibly harsh realities, that good things are going to kind of follow from that. So I think that's one of the kind of upsides of this particular full moon. It's not all kind of doom and gloom. I think the more fluid we are, the more we stand to benefit from opportunities that we might not necessarily have foreseen. And sometimes by making space in our lives through letting go of shedding, we welcome in new starts and opportunities, that we hadn't quite banked on. So that's kind of interesting. And then, as I said, Uranus is going to station on the 18th, so we can see Uranus in Taurus here in the sort of 7th house, and you can see it's got that S, so it's kind of already, from our perspective, standing still in the sky. So I think we might feel that kind of hushed feeling that you sometimes feel, that kind of calm before a storm, like a thunderstorm. And this this energy is still, I mean, what we need to bear in mind is that Uranus is still within 3 degrees of Saturn. So we're still kind of coming out of the tail end of that Saturn-Uranus square that we had back in December. And I think this is still reflected in the stock markets, for example, which are a little bit erratic and crazy and volatile. But we are slowly moving away from that. And I think as Uranus changes direction, it will start to pull away from Saturn, and it will start to move kind of forward again, and we will start to feel more of a sense of clarity about where we're kind of heading, I think, and also we'll start to see this momentum building in the outside world. That change is actually starting to gather pace, if you like. So that's, I think, a positive thing. And then, as I say, Venus and Mercury retrograde until kind of end of January, early February, which we're going to look at in a minute when we look at the cosmic calendar. And of course, Aquarius season beginning on the 19th or the 20th of January, not February. And then we kind of move into that really interesting energy with the new moon that happens at the beginning of February, where I think things are going to start to feel quite exciting. So I think this second half of January is really about closing out, consolidating things from the past, things that are unfinished, things we've been hanging on to. You know, Cancer does tend to kind of cling, and Capricorn likes certainty and structure and security. So really kind of coming to terms with certain issues from the past. And then I think we'll be ready to move into February with a kind of a clean slate, if you like. So that's a good way to see this 2-week period. So, but let's look a little bit closer now at the cosmic calendar and at the sort of individual transits to see what we can expect from the cosmic weather over the next 2 weeks or so. So here we've got you know, sort of January, and it's been a bit of an interesting one because, you know, certainly during this kind of mid period, as we were kind of moving towards Mercury retrograde, the heavens were quite quiet, particularly from the 12th of January kind of onwards. There wasn't really a lot sort of happening. But then in the build up to this full moon, things start to kind of get a little bit intense again. So you can see on the 16th we had this Sun Pluto conjunction, which keys into the aspects that we're talking about in relation to the full moon, which happens on the 17th. Here you can see this full moon in Cancer, and so as I say, I think we could almost feel this urge to stay in control, to demand kind of like answers, to demand structure from people, or to kind of wrest control from those people that we feel are kind of being a little bit too controlling or domineering. I think going into this full moon. So as I say, it could feel a little bit intense, and I think what we need to do is just kind of trust in ourselves, almost in our own ability to navigate difficult situations, and also I think in our kind of our core resilience as kind of like biological, like animals essentially, to survive, you know, whatever kind of comes our way. Pluto can really be about survival, and we can sometimes feel as though we're pushed into fight or flight mode or sort of survival mode, and that can sometimes make people a little bit ruthless, or kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say harsh, but mercenary. And I think the key thing is to sort of move past that illusion of control, you know, with the kind of the water energy of Cancer, and to kind of go, this too shall pass. It's not actually the end of the world. It might feel like the end of the world. You know, with Pluto it usually does feel like the end of the world, or feels very dramatic. But this too shall pass, and I will survive, like no matter what, kind of thing. And also that I've got what it takes in terms of like internal grit to kind of make my way, to navigate my way through this situation, even though it could feel potentially quite, I said, dangerous or threatening, or, you know, in some way a little bit intense. And then, you know, past the full moon, we move into this shift in the energies, where first of all we've got Uranus stationing at around about 3:30 GMT on the 18th, and on top of that we've got Mercury making a sextile to Chiron. So that's kind of interesting. You know, this adds a sort of an element of healing and reconciliation when it comes to particularly communications with others, or the way that we see things, not feeling so split in our mental bodies. And, with Mercury retrograde, there is, I think, quite a positive urge to consider our perspectives and paradigms, to look back at the way that we've done things in the past, and to maybe tweak or correct or see where we've kind of done things well and give ourselves credit for that, and kind of take lessons or kernels from that and then build on them. So I like to think about Mercury in terms of writing, because it is, particularly Mercury in Virgo, is so much to do with writing, and this is very much about that kind of editing process where we're kind of going over the text that we might have written in terms of our experience, or our interactions, over the last however long since the last Mercury retrograde. And we're kind of editing. So we're improving, we're polishing, we're refining, we're getting rid of typos, we are polishing and kind of cutting out what isn't working, maybe restructuring, etc., etc. So it's that kind of energy. And then you add in Chiron, which is a kind of a healing energy. And I think it's really about rewriting our personal story, all the way that our perspective, how we see things, or situations or experiences, and sort of taking positive messages of kind of growth and healing moving forward. And then, on the 20th, the sun ingresses into Aquarius, so this is the beginning of Aquarius season. So this happens at around about 2:40 GMT, and again, this is a time to focus on friendships, on groups, on our tribe. We can sometimes feel a lot more sociable or gregarious than certainly we might feel during a Cancer full moon, which, as I say, can make us feel a little bit shy, introverted and sensitive. We might want to kind of run and hide a little bit. It's also time to be kind of spontaneous and innovative, and to kind of focus more on the we rather than the me. So, as I say, quite an interesting shift from this kind of Cancer Capricorn energy into Uranus energy. And then things go quiet again for the rest of the week until we get to the 23rd or so, where the Sun and Mercury finally kind of come together. So that's kind of interesting. The Sun and Mercury, this is a retrograde Mercury, kind of coming together. So there will be a Cazimi on this day, on the 23rd. So around about just after... from kind of 10:20 or so onwards GMT, and I mean, I do think this is a very interesting Cazimi, where we are kind of really kind of taking in maybe information that we've kind of gathered from other sources, because Mercury is the sort of ultimate kind of liminal kind of messenger that allows us to sort of traverse worlds and to see things from different perspectives, and to kind of gather and to assimilate, and then you kind of you bring this into the sort of the solar energy, which is of the kind of the heart, and you're finding a way to make it your personal truth. So kind of an interesting Cazimi, I think, on the 23rd. Then the next day we've got Mars ingressing into Capricorn, which is really lovely energy. So this is where Capricorn, where Mars is exalted, is in Capricorn. So goat season not entirely over. With Mars here, this really allows you to kind of pursue your personal goals and desires in a structured, responsible and methodical way. So it's really when you can start to kind of act on your ambitions and get things done. But I think the key thing is not to be too pushy or domineering. So it's almost kind of taking maybe the plans and the sort of the structures that you developed during goat season, and maybe didn't feel that you could enact because of Venus and Mercury being retrograde, and now actually take action on those, because of course Venus is going to go retrograde on the 29th and Mercury not long afterwards, on the 4th. So we can see Mercury going back into Capricorn on the 26th briefly, and that will last a week or so until Mercury stations and then moves back into Capricorn, into Aquarius. So again, this is almost a kind of a liminal period where you can go back to some of the issues that maybe arose kind of pre Mercury's ingress into Aquarius on the 2nd of January. So in other words, in December. And if there's anything unfinished from that time, you can now work on it, finish it, close it off, incorporate it, close the deal if you like, or sign off on something that maybe the jury was out about, or that there was still uncertainty around, between during this period. So we're talking about from the 26th until, let's see, when does Mercury? Yes, Mercury goes back into Aquarius on the 14th. So you've got the first 2 weeks of February, and the last week of January, in which to kind of, close out those matters. And this may be like job interviews. It might be talks about like a merger. It might be something to do with like parenting, or restructuring your schedule, all that kind of stuff. So that's from the 26th kind of onwards. And then again, we've got a few quiet days until we come to the 29th or so, and then we can see Venus stationing here on the 29th at about 9 a.m. GMT, and I think that will come as a relief to a lot of people who are Venus ruled, or who've got Venus quite prominently in their charts. Yes, not been an easy January as far as that's concerned. And then on top of that, Mercury moving to make a conjunction to Pluto again. So we had that in December, so this is a second opportunity in which to sort of revisit issues from that first conjunction, and to speak some truth, or to persuade someone to your point of view, or simply to speak from a kind of an empowered position. It's also very good for therapy and for research, so having penetrating insights into things that perhaps were unclear before, having another crack at the whip, at some sort of like science project, or business application, or like what do you call it, tender, something like that, like a powwow. It's also great for politicians, for sort of having high level effective talks, so that's quite good. And then also we have the Sun making a sextile to Chiron, so echoing the one that Mercury had on the 18th. So there may be a connection between the two things, because of course Mercury has translated its light to the Sun, and then the Sun is translating it back to Chiron. So again, opportunities here for sometimes spiritual awakening, or kind of realizations, important realizations, perhaps linked to that, that Mercury, those Mercury transits. It can also be where we sort of, our inner teacher kind of helps us to see things, or reframe things in a new way that feels very enriching, or healing, or somehow wise. We could also get some great advice from somebody who is perhaps a little bit older than us, or more experienced, and where we may also enjoy a renewed sense of purpose, on some level, individual purpose. So yes, and then the 30th and the 31st, we've got a little bit of rocky energy here on the 30th with the Sun, which makes a square to Uranus at around about 7:30 GMT on the 30th, so that's on a Sunday. And that can sometimes feel a little bit rocky. You can sometimes feel a bit restless. You can also feel that you like pushed into making premature changes. We can feel a little bit impulsive, or we can revolt against authority. So it can sometimes make us a little bit perverse, and a little bit of restraint is not a bad thing when it comes to taking action, thinking before we speak, that kind of thing, just so that we avoid collateral damage, or perhaps shocking somebody, or maybe doing something that has inadvertent consequences. Yes, and then that's kind of like the last transit really worth speaking about, because then in February, like the 1st of February, we have a new moon in Aquarius, so that will really start a new cycle, and I think that's something that we can potentially focus on in the next forecast. But I think that gives you an idea of the energy, and you can see that it is quite slow paced with Mercury retrograde. That we've got a lot of opportunities for kind of breaks, certainly in terms of the cosmic weather, where we can process information, really think about things deeply, integrate, revisit, etc., etc. So I think it's quite good. Pace remains relatively slow. We start to anticipate change moving into February, and there might be a few things that are kind of thrown up for us, as I say, by the Sun Pluto stuff and by Uranus, but I think on the whole we'll be able to cope with it because we've got time. It's, you know, because other things are not everything's happening at once. You know, we've got these kind of breathing spaces in, you know, in between things. So I think that's really, really, really good. Yeah, so that's kind of it for me, short and sweet. There aren't really any fixed star aspects worth talking about. Just a reminder to those who are interested in membership to my website. I'm extending the offer that I made in January because I've had quite a lot of problems migrating my website over, and so it's meant that people can't really access my website a lot at the moment. So that offer is extending to the end of February 2022, and it means that you can save 22% off premium membership. So just go to the Astrology Sphere shop, and you will automatically get the discount when you go to checkout. So that's just something to consider, and you can find out more about, you know, what each tier of membership kind of offers as well by visiting either astrologysphere.com/subscribe, or, as I say, going to the Astrology Sphere shop. So yeah, I hope that's been helpful. Yes, I will be doing a separate forecast for you know, for crypto, but you know, in the meantime, my forecast from the solar eclipse still holds. So check that out if you haven't already. I think it's quite good for kind of macro kind of cycles and things, particularly while things remain so volatile. But yeah, wishing you all the best for this upcoming 2-week cycle, and I'll see you again in February.